Okay. Well, all right, guys, let's move on in the program. I'm going to bring on our first guest, Mr. Dave Argabright from, he lives in Fishers, Indiana. Dave, welcome to the program.
Hey, how you doing? Glad to be on. Appreciate the invite.
Not a problem. Yeah. Now, the listeners, you guys would recognize Dave from Speed Channel and his many hats he wears. He does much more than just cover late models. Dave, walk us through your broadcasting career and where you got your start.
Well, it was sort of an accident, Webb. I did quite a bit of writing for a number of years, and in the mid-'90s, just through some connections, started to dabble just a little bit with some local, racing coverage and on a couple different cable TV shows that we had. And then in 2000 was invited to begin working for TNN, covering the World of Outlaw sprint cars. We did about 25 live shows a year back then, and did that for a couple of years, and then did a bunch of live shows in '03 on Speed Channel of a bunch of USAC open-wheel cars, and then not long after that began doing some late model work with Lucas Oil and their series. And I always tell people it was just really some fortuitous accident, because I had no broadcasting experience. I just was a writer and pretty passionate about racing, and it just sort of fell into place.
And I was going to mention the fact that you were an author also. Now, did you do the Thursday Night Thunder from Speedrome? Was that one of your deals?
No, I don't. Well, I don't remember working the Speedrome, but we did a bunch of live USAC races. They were not ESPN, and they didn't call them Thunder at that time, but I don't remember if we did any at the Speedrome or not. I did a couple of small pieces back on Thunder, some feature-type, personality-type features for them, but I don't really remember where they aired, which shows. These were things we would go produce through the week at somebody's shop or something before the race, and then they would produce them and then drop them into the show. So I don't remember if any of them were the Speedrome or not.
Now, here in the last, say 6-7 years, the Internet's got really involved in covering motorsports, and I guess the perfect model in the late model world would be Dirt on Dirt. I mean, Michael Rigsby's done a great job. He's brought journalism, professionalism, and everything to covering it. How do you think the Internet's going to play moving forward with as much coverage as there is because of the Internet?
Oh, I think it'll just continue to be a force. I think it'll increase. The barrier of entry used to be that you could produce a show, but you couldn't air it anywhere unless you had some sort of relationship with a network. And well, now the Internet is the network. And like Michael has done, you can register a domain and then concentrate on building your listenership or viewership, and then feed it with programming that you go out and produce, or make arrangements with other people to feed you with programming, and that's how you build an audience. And that's never going to get any smaller. I think that's just going to continue to grow. And I think it's a completely different animal, though, than television, because I think the Internet plays toward a much more specialized audience. People who are probably already a fan of that particular type of racing are going to look specifically for it on the web, whereas television, when you can get on Speed Channel or Versus or CBS or whatever, you've got a greater opportunity, I think, to reach eyeballs that are not necessarily aware of what your sport is already. And I just look at them as two completely different animals. They don't really compete with each other. They just have sort of a different reach and a different methodology, I guess.
And I'm glad you parlayed nicely into the television. I was going to ask you, you're part of, here recently, last couple of years, the Show Me 100 has been on Speed. Of course, they rebroadcast all these other races that Lucas Oil Productions puts together. How is that playing with people, the suits outside of our sport? What are they thinking of that? Do you have any kind of feedback from the suits involved in those projects?
Webb, I learned a long time ago that the farther away I stay from that end of it, the happier I am. Actually, I don't get involved in the business side, but I do know that, for example, our shows that were on CBS, the ratings this year at the Show Me were up considerably, like 25%, and everybody at Speed and CBS and Lucas are very, very happy, and hopefully we can build that into something larger where we do more and more shows, and as long as you have the numbers, it always works. It's the numbers, good or bad, the numbers always drive everything that we're doing.
How do you think how do you think the late model community receives those broad? And I don't mean this in a negative way. I don't want you to take what I'm about to say wrong, but it almost seems watered down to the rest of us. How can we merge the two, the new eyeballs and the old eyeballs, and merge the program to make it a little bit better for both parties? Because you hear people complain this way or that way about everything in our sport, but how do we make it better for both sides of the people watching?
Well, that's the greatest challenge for anybody producing a show, to be honest with you. It's the same for your show or Michael's website or the shows we do on CBS. You're broadcasting. You're reaching a wide cross-section of people, and the biggest mistake you can make, in my opinion, is to focus too narrowly on any one segment. Because if I'm a newbie at anything, if I tuned in a show on scuba diving and it looked interesting to me and I knew nothing about it, if they were talking at such a high level with such insider jargon that I really had no idea what was going on, I'm going to reach for the remote and I'm going to find something else that engages me. And racing's the same way. I mean, we got to keep in mind that we're serving an established audience that does care a lot and knows a lot about the sport, but we shouldn't be selfish. We shouldn't say, well, don't tell me this, I already know it. Look, dude, you got to be a little bit patient here. If we want to grow the sport, you got to make it welcoming and open for other people. I really see it, Webb, too, even at the racetrack. I mean, lots of, I guess, really weathered race fans like us, we might sit up there and it's a little chilly and we're saying, I don't want driver intros, let's go, I want to go home. But yet driver intros, when the audience can see these guys' faces and they can wave and cheer, and that's an important part of the night. So don't be selfish. Don't cheat somebody else out of something that they really enjoy that helps them get closer to the sport. And
you're exactly right. And the way I would describe that to people when I hear them complain is you have to know the flesh that's tied to that metal. That's what draws you to racing. Back in the old days, it was just A.J. Foyt and Andretti were heroes, and people revered them. We've kind of lost that, and I think if we can get people back, hey, this is a dangerous sport, and these guys are heroes and athletes. So, yeah, it's a tough. Sometimes it's tough to convince the new eyeballs. Well,
and one thing I have learned, Webb, this is just an unfortunate fact of life, is that just because people are complaining doesn't mean they're correct.
Oh, well, that's true, yeah. And tongues wagging is always a good thing, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, as long as we don't make it negative, and, I do think that we got to be careful with the social media and the internet and everything. It's so easy to complain now that we can get into some bad habits where pretty soon, somebody starts to look around and say, this isn't any fun anymore. We definitely don't want that.
Oh, well, yeah, and you go to some of these forums, if the wind blew the wrong direction at a racetrack, that somebody's going to say something, so you got to take a lot of that with just a grain of sawdust.
Yep, exactly. Yep.
Well, before we let you get out of here, I always ask this of the people that I respect their opinion. The overall health, and when I mean the overall health of the sport, I mean top to bottom. What is your opinion in the economic trouble we've been in here lately?
Well, overall, I think the sport's in pretty decent shape, particularly when you think about we have had a pretty long economic downturn here that we're kind of enduring, and it's the biggest issue with our sport is the same as any other form of racing, and that is on the race car side, it just still costs way too much to go racing. It costs too much for the car. It costs too much to get there. It costs the promoter too much to put the show on. Those are the things that we got to struggle with. It still costs too much to go racing, and there's not a lot we can do about it readily, but, as long as we can kind of hang in there and maybe get through this rough patch in the economy, hopefully some of those problems will correct themselves once the economy and sponsorship comes back to where it's a little more feasible for mid-range and weekly guys to get. I think if anything, the sport's probably struggling more on the weekly level and getting folks out to the racetrack every Saturday night more than the big events and the specials that I've seen.
It's just like so much more to compete with Nintendos and
exactly.
PlayStation and all that stuff. And the cost. There's got to be a ceiling because it can't go in the direction it's going. as right now, I mean, it's just, I mean, a $40,000 motor is just ridiculous. And there's guys that want to be like Bloomquist, that want to be like Jimmy Owens, who think they got to spend that kind of money. And I think we've lost track. Racing doesn't matter if you're going 70 or 170. I think we just need to get back to racing. That's would be the first thing I would solve is just get back to racing and bring these prices back down to earth.
Well, almost always more money makes the car work better, and the better the car works, the worse the racing. You need guys out there that aren't working so good, and you need guys that are working real well so they can pass them. If everybody's working really, really well with excellent equipment, the racing typically isn't very good.
Well, the parities, yeah, you get to be too much parity, yeah. I understand.
Right.
Certainly understand that. Well, before we get out of here, let you get out of here, what do you have on your plate in the near future?
Well, I'm actually working really hard on a book with Larry Moore, the old late model guy, and super interesting person, and I've written a whole variety of books about different people down to the last 10, 12 years, and this is the first late model type character that I've ever worked with, and I'm glad I chose Larry. He's a super fun person, and so far I think it's going to be a really, really good book. I'm very excited, and I'm kind of holding my breath and crossing my fingers a little bit, hoping the late model community will embrace a book about one of their own. So I haven't done any yet, so I don't know, but I'm hoping so.
Well, yeah, books, that's one of my bucket lists, and if I had the time and the money, I'd like to write one about Red Farmer.
Hey, there you go. Great topic.
Well, it's going to be a long one. You can read one by Dave Argabright about Jack Hewitt.
That's right. Yeah, it's got a late model chapter, but Larry's just the opposite. He's got a late model book with a sprint car chapter, just the opposite of Jack.
Uh-huh. And Larry Moore, I'm pretty, now correct me if I'm wrong, but he's kind of more of a local, closer to Cincinnati guy.
Well, he was the first 3-time winner of the World 100 and one of the early NDRA champions, and he won, all over the east and central part of the U.S., probably 500 races or so. And early on, yes, he was a local guy around Cincinnati because that's really all there was. Racers didn't travel at that time, but boy, with the birth of NDRA, man, he was one of the very original road warriors in dirt late model racing, and he's got some pretty hairy tales to tell.
David, if I recall right, and you might want to ask him that, but I think my grandfather built some of his cars for him.
What's your grandfather's name?
H.D. Lawson.
Yeah, it could be. Where's he from?
Hamilton, Ohio. Right,
yeah,
just north of Cincinnati.
So. Right, no, right where it is. Larry drove, from the early 60s to the mid-80s. He drove for just a whole bunch of different car owners, and some were one-off, some were the whole season, that sort of thing. And he's been down just about every road. So I bet you're correct about him driving one of your grandfather's cars.
All right, Dave. Well, is there a place where a listener may find some of the books you've written that they could purchase?
My website is www.daveargabright.com. If you Google Jack Hewitt book, I believe our site's the first one that comes up.
Well, I certainly appreciate taking time out of your evening. We'd like to have you back at some point. I certainly can call on you again.
Absolutely. Call me anytime. Love to come on.
All right. Well, Dave Argabright, author, broadcaster, thank you for being with us tonight.
All right, guys. Have a great evening.